The bullet grazed so close to Penelope Bradford's temple that she felt the heat of its sear past her skin. And in that moment, sprawled in the red dust of Mineral Park, Arizona, she understood her mother had been right all along about trusting anyone. It was August 1878, and the mining town sat baking under a merciless sun that turned the desert landscape into shimmering waves of heat. Penelope had arrived 3 weeks earlier on the stagecoach from St. Louis, clutching a carpetbag and a letter from her Uncle Gerald promising employment at his general store. What she had found instead was an empty building with a faded sign and neighbors who told her Gerald Bradford had died 6 months prior from consumption, taking his promises to the grave with him. Now she lay in the street while 2 men fired at each other over a card game dispute, one of them using the water trough she had been standing beside as cover. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she pressed herself flat against the packed earth, tasting dirt and fear. When the shooting finally stopped and rough hands grabbed her arms to haul her upright, Penelope jerked away so violently she nearly fell again. "Easy there, miss," the deputy said, his weathered face creased with concern. "You hurt?" "No." The word came out sharp, brittle. She brushed the dust from her worn calico dress with shaking hands, refusing to meet his eyes. Trust the law, her mother had said before the fever took her. Trust your husband. Trust your family. And look where it had gotten her mother, married to a man who drank away every cent and beat her for sport until pneumonia had been almost a mercy. Penelope had trusted her uncle's letter. She had trusted that she could build something new in this raw frontier town. She had been a fool. She made her way back to the boarding house where she rented a cramped room for 50 cents a night, a price that was eating through her meager savings like acid through cloth. Mrs. Henderson, the proprietress, looked up from her sewing when Penelope entered the dim hallway. "Nearly got yourself killed, I heard," the older woman said without preamble. "That is the 3rd shooting this week. This town attracts trouble like honey attracts flies. I noticed." Penelope climbed the narrow stairs to her room, locked the door, and sat on the thin mattress. Through the window, she could see the purple mountains in the distance, ancient and implacable. The Hualapai Range, someone had told her. Beyond them lay wilderness, and beyond that, more wilderness. Arizona Territory was no place for a woman alone, especially not a 22-year-old with no family, no prospects, and trust in her fellow humans worn down to nothing. She had $43 left, perhaps enough for a ticket back east, but back to what? The only person who had ever cared for her was dead. Her father had vanished into a whiskey bottle years ago. She had no siblings, no friends who would take her in. Coming west had been an act of desperation, and now desperation was all she had left. The next morning, Penelope walked the dusty Main Street looking for work. She tried the hotel first, but the manager took one look at her and said he needed someone with experience. The saloon owner laughed in her face when she asked about washing dishes. The millinery shop had no positions. The restaurant said to come back in a month. Even the laundry, where Chinese workers toiled over steaming vats, had no need for another set of hands. By noon, the August heat was oppressive, turning her dress into a stifling cage and her bonnet into an oven. She bought a dipper of water from a barrel for a penny and stood in the shade of an awning, watching the town flow around her. Miners with sun-scorched faces, merchants calling their wares. A woman in a fine green dress who could only be connected to the saloon, given how the decent ladies crossed the street to avoid her. Penelope felt invisible, a ghost already haunting the place where her hopes had died. "You looking for work?" Penelope turned to find a man in a dusty suit studying her. He was middle-aged, with calculating eyes and a smile that did not reach them. Every instinct she possessed screamed danger. "Perhaps," she said carefully. "I run an establishment that always needs pretty girls. Room and board included, and you would make more in a week than most folks see in a month." Her stomach turned. "No, thank you. Now do not be hasty. It is respectable work, serving drinks, talking to the customers." I said no. Penelope walked away quickly, her pulse racing. She had been warned about men like that. They started with promises and ended with chains, one way or another. Trust only brought pain. Her mother's bitter wisdom echoed in her mind as she hurried down the street. She was not watching where she was going and collided hard with something that felt like a wall of solid muscle. Strong hands caught her shoulders, steadying her before she could fall. Penelope looked up and up, into the face of the largest man she had ever seen. He stood well over 6 feet tall, with shoulders so broad they blocked out the sun. His arms, visible beneath the rolled sleeves of his rough cotton shirt, were corded with muscle, and his chest was a barrel of strength beneath the worn fabric. He had dark hair that fell past his collar in thick waves, a strong jaw covered in several days of beard growth, and eyes the color of storm clouds over the mountains. Everything about him radiated power and danger, and Penelope jerked backward out of his grip as though burned. "Sorry, miss," he said, his voice a deep rumble. "Didn't see you there. My fault." She stepped around him, heart pounding, and continued down the street. When she glanced back, he was still standing there, watching her with an unreadable expression. That night, Penelope counted her money again. $41. The boarding house would want another $3.50 at the end of the week. Food was expensive. Everything was expensive. She lay awake in the darkness, listening to the sounds of the town, the distant piano from the saloon, voices raised in argument, a dog barking. The heat barely lessened after sunset, and sweat dampened her thin nightgown. She had to find work, any work, before her money ran out, and she had no choice but to accept offers from men with calculating eyes. In the morning she tried again. The feed store, the assayer's office, the barber. No one wanted to hire a woman with no references and no skills beyond basic reading, writing, and arithmetic. By afternoon, desperation had driven her to the edge of town, where a hand-lettered sign outside a rough cabin advertised eggs for sale. An old woman answered her knock, face weathered as old leather, eyes sharp and suspicious. "What do you want? I saw your sign. I wondered if you might need help with your chickens or anything else. I am a hard worker and I do not require much pay." The woman looked her up and down. "You running from something?" "No, I came here to work for my uncle, but he died before I arrived. I need employment." "What is your name?" "Penelope Bradford. I am Mrs. Chen. My husband works the mine. I keep chickens, sell eggs, take in washing." She paused, considering. "You know anything about chickens?" "No, madam, but I can learn." Mrs. Chen snorted. "At least you are honest. Come back tomorrow at dawn. I will give you a trial. $1 a week plus eggs. If you work out, maybe more." It was not enough to live on, but it was something. Penelope felt a tiny flicker of hope. "Thank you. I will be here." She walked back toward town as the sun began its descent toward the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. The road was empty, the desert spreading out on either side in a vast expanse of scrub and stone. She was halfway back when she heard hoofbeats behind her. Penelope turned to see 3 riders approaching at a canter. Even from a distance, she could tell they were drunk by the way they sat their horses. Her mouth went dry. The road stretched empty in both directions. No one to help. Nowhere to hide. She kept walking faster now, her eyes fixed on the town ahead. The riders caught up with her easily, circling around to block her path. Their horses snorted and stamped, kicking up dust. "Well, well," said the one in front, a lean man with a scar across his cheek. "What do we have here? Pretty little thing all alone." "Excuse me," Penelope said, trying to step around them. Her voice shook despite her best efforts. Another rider moved to block her. "Now, where are you going in such a hurry? We just want to talk." "I have nothing to say." She turned to go back the way she had come, but the third rider cut her off. They were laughing now, enjoying her fear. Penelope's hands clenched into fists. She thought of screaming, but who would hear her out here? Leave her be. The voice came from behind her, deep and commanding. Penelope spun to see the large man from yesterday sitting astride a massive bay horse. He must have come from one of the side trails, appearing as if from nowhere. In the slanting sunlight, he looked even more imposing, all muscle and coiled strength. He held the reins loosely in one hand, the other resting on his thigh near a knife sheath. The scarred man's smile faded. "This is not your business, McAllister." "I am making it my business, Donovan. The lady wants to be left alone. We are just being friendly." "No, you are not." The big man's horse moved forward, and Penelope saw the three riders shift uneasily in their saddles. "Ride on. Now." For a long moment, tension hung in the air like the dust from the horse's hooves. Then Donovan spat into the dirt and jerked his horse's head around. "Come on, boys." "Not worth the trouble." They rode off toward town at a gallop, leaving Penelope standing in the road with her rescuer. She looked up at him, this mountain of a man on his huge horse, and felt a confusing tangle of gratitude and wariness. He had helped her. But why? What did he want in return? "Thank you," she managed. He dismounted in one smooth motion and stood a respectful distance away. Up close, she could see his eyes were actually gray with flecks of blue, like storm clouds breaking. "You should not be walking alone out here. It is not safe. I had business at the edge of town." Her defensive tone surprised her. "I can take care of myself." Something that might have been amusement flickered across his weathered face. "I am sure you can, miss. But even so, I would be obliged if you would let me see you back to town. Those three might be waiting." The logic was sound, much as Penelope hated to admit it. She nodded stiffly. "Very well." He swung back into the saddle and walked his horse beside her as she resumed her journey toward Mineral Park. The silence stretched between them, not quite comfortable but not hostile either. Penelope kept stealing glances at him, trying to reconcile his size and obvious strength with the gentle way he handled his horse, the careful distance he maintained. "My name is Marcus McAllister," he said finally. "I have a claim up in the mountains. Come into town for supplies every few weeks." She should not tell him her name, should not engage in conversation. But he had helped her, and some small part of her, the part not yet completely hardened by loss and betrayal, whispered that rudeness was unwarranted. "Penelope Bradford, you are new to Mineral Park. How did you know?" "Small town. Word travels." He paused. "I heard about your uncle. I am sorry." The sympathy in his voice threatened to crack something inside her. Penelope looked away, blinking hard. "Thank you." They walked in silence for another minute. Then Marcus said, "Those men, Donovan and his friends. They are trouble. If they bother you again, you tell the sheriff, or you tell me." "Why would you help me?" The question burst out before she could stop it. "You do not know me. What do you want?" He reined his horse to a stop, looking down at her with those storm cloud eyes. "I do not want anything, Miss Bradford. I helped you because it was the right thing to do. Because my mother raised me to believe that a man who does not stand up for those who need it is not much of a man at all." Penelope stared at him, searching for deception and finding none. It made no sense. In her experience, everyone wanted something. Everyone had an angle. "I do not understand." "I think you have met too many of the wrong kind of people," Marcus said quietly. "Not everyone is out to hurt you." The words struck too close to home. Penelope turned away, resuming her walk toward town. After a moment, she heard the horse following. They completed the journey in silence, and when they reached the main street, Marcus touched his hat brim in farewell. "Safe travels, Miss Bradford." She watched him ride toward the general store, his broad back straight in the saddle. Then she shook herself and hurried to the boarding house. She had no time to puzzle over strange mountain men with kind eyes. She had work starting tomorrow, and she needed to be ready. Dawn came early and harsh. Penelope walked to Mrs. Chen's cabin in the cool pre-sunrise air, grateful for the brief respite from the heat. The old woman set her to work immediately, showing her how to collect eggs without disturbing the hens, how to clean the coop, how to mix the feed. It was hard, dirty work, and by noon Penelope's back ached and her dress was filthy. But Mrs. Chen seemed satisfied with her efforts, and that was enough. Over the following days, a routine established itself. Penelope rose before dawn, worked with the chickens until mid-afternoon, then returned to town to look for additional employment. She found a few hours of work here and there, mending clothes for the hotel, scrubbing floors at the restaurant. It was barely enough to cover her room and food, but it was honest work, and she clung to that. She saw Marcus twice more that first week. Once outside the general store, loading supplies onto a pack mule, and once at the edge of town as she returned from Mrs. Chen's. Both times he nodded to her politely, and both times Penelope felt that same confusing mix of wariness and something else she refused to examine too closely. The second week, a complication arrived in the form of Thomas Gentry. He was a merchant, newly prosperous from shrewd dealings in mining equipment, and he decided Penelope would make a suitable wife. He cornered her outside the restaurant where she sometimes worked, his round face shining with sweat and confidence. "Miss Bradford, I have been watching you. You are a hard worker, respectable, pretty enough. I am in need of a wife to manage my household. I can offer you security, a good home, and social standing." Penelope stared at him in disbelief. "Mr. Gentry, I barely know you. What is there to know? I am a successful businessman. You are alone in a hard town. This is a practical arrangement that would benefit us both." "No, thank you." His confident smile faltered. "You should think carefully before refusing. A woman in your position cannot afford to be choosy." Anger flared hot in her chest. "I can afford to choose not to marry a stranger who sees me as a transaction." "Good day, Mr. Gentry." She walked away, shaking with fury and something like fear. He was right about one thing: she was in a precarious position. But marrying a man she did not know, did not care for, who clearly viewed her as property to be acquired, that was a trap she would not walk into willingly. That evening, as she sat on the boarding house porch trying to catch a breeze, Mrs. Henderson came out with 2 glasses of lemonade. "I saw Thomas Gentry talking to you today. He proposed marriage. And you refused." "Of course I did." The older woman settled into the other rocking chair with a sigh. "You might want to reconsider, dear. Winter comes hard here and work gets scarce. A husband would solve a lot of problems. Or create new ones." Penelope sipped the tart lemonade. "My mother married for security. It did not keep her safe." Mrs. Henderson was quiet for a moment. "Not all men are cruel, Penelope. Enough of them are that the risk is not worth it." The next day was Sunday, and Penelope allowed herself the luxury of a slower morning. She washed her hair, mended the tear in her second dress, and wrote a letter to no one in particular, just to practice keeping her penmanship sharp. In the afternoon, restlessness drove her to explore the area beyond town. She followed a trail that wound up into the foothills, where the desert gave way to scattered pine trees, and the air grew fractionally cooler. The view from higher ground was spectacular, the valley spread out below, the town a small cluster of buildings against the vast landscape. Penelope sat on a sun-warmed rock and let herself breathe, really breathe, for the first time in weeks. Beautiful, is it not? She jumped, nearly losing her balance on the rock. Marcus stood a few yards away, apparently having approached in complete silence despite his size. He wore different clothes today, buckskin pants and a dark shirt, and he carried a rifle slung over one massive shoulder. His hair was tied back with a leather thong, emphasizing the strong lines of his face. "You startled me," Penelope said, pressing a hand to her racing heart. "Sorry, I thought you heard me coming." He gestured to another rock. "May I?" She should say no. Should gather her skirts and return to town, to safety, to the walls she had built around herself. Instead, she found herself nodding. Marcus sat, moving with surprising grace for such a large man. He set the rifle carefully aside and looked out over the valley. "I come up here sometimes when town gets too loud. You do not like civilization. I like it in small doses, but I have spent most of my life in the mountains. Cities, towns, even places like Mineral Park, they feel closed in." "Where are you from originally?" "Montana Territory." "My father was a trapper. I grew up learning to live off the land, hunt, track, survive in places that would kill most men." He glanced at her. "What about you, Miss Bradford?" "St. Louis. My mother was a seamstress. My father was a drunk." The words came out flat, factual. "There is not much else to tell." "I think there is a great deal to tell, but you do not trust me enough to tell it." His directness caught her off guard. Penelope looked at him sharply. "I do not know you, true, but I would like to remedy that if you would let me." "Why?" The question again, persistent as a thorn. "What do you want from me?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment, his gaze on the distant mountains. When he spoke, his voice was thoughtful. "When I was 12, my mother died giving birth to what would have been my sister. The baby died too. My father fell apart, started drinking, stopped caring about anything. One winter we were snowed in at our cabin and he just gave up. Did not hunt, did not check the traps, did not do anything but drink the whiskey he had stocked up. I kept us alive that winter. Hunted rabbits, set snares, melted snow for water. When spring came, my father looked at me like he was seeing me for the first time. He said, 'You are stronger than I ever was.' Then he walked out into the woods and I never saw him again." Penelope sat very still, the pain in his story resonating with her own losses. "I learned something that winter," Marcus continued. "That strength is not just about muscles or survival skills. It is about not giving up, even when everything seems impossible. When I see you, walking into town covered in dust from Mrs. Chen's chicken coop, holding your head high even though people like Gentry treat you like you are desperate, I see that same strength, and I admire it." Her throat felt tight. "That is not what I expected you to say." "What did you expect?" "I do not know. Some kind of pretty lie, maybe, a manipulation." He turned to face her fully, and the intensity in his gray eyes made her breath catch. "I do not lie, Miss Bradford. Do not know how, really. It is a flaw, according to some. I say what I mean, and I mean what I say. So when I tell you I would like to know you better, I mean it. No hidden motives, no expectations, just two people talking." Penelope wanted to believe him with a fierceness that frightened her, but belief was dangerous, trust was dangerous. "I should get back to town." "All right." He stood, offering his hand to help her down from the rock. She hesitated, then took it. His palm was calloused and warm, his grip gentle despite the obvious strength in his fingers. The moment her feet touched the ground, she pulled away. They walked down the trail together, and Marcus told her about his claim in the mountains, how he worked a small silver vein that provided enough income for his simple needs, how he had built his cabin with his own hands, cut every log, chinked every gap. how he preferred the company of his horse and the occasional deer to the noise and chaos of town. Despite herself, Penelope found herself relaxing, even contributing to the conversation. She told him about working for Mrs. Chen, about the satisfaction of honest labor even when her muscles ached. She did not tell him about her father's fists or her mother's tears, but perhaps he heard them anyway in the things she did not say. When they reached the edge of town, Marcus paused. "Would you allow me to walk with you again sometime? Maybe show you some of the prettier parts of the territory?" Every instinct screamed to refuse. Instead, Penelope heard herself say, "Perhaps, if I have time." His smile transformed his rugged face, making him look younger, lighter. "I will take that as a maybe. Good evening, Miss Bradford." She watched him walk away, then turned toward the boarding house, her mind spinning. She barely knew this man. He was too big, too strong, too capable of hurting her if he chose. And yet, something in the way he looked at her, the way he spoke to her like she mattered, like her thoughts and feelings were worth considering, it called to a part of her she had thought dead. That night, she dreamed of mountains and storm cloud eyes. The following week brought punishing heat and trouble. Donovan, the scarred man Marcus had confronted, started making a point of being wherever Penelope happened to be. He did not approach her directly, just watched with that unpleasant smile, making sure she knew he was there. It set her nerves on edge, made her jump at shadows. Mrs. Chen noticed. "That man bothering you. He has not done anything, just watches. Watching is doing something. You tell the sheriff." But Penelope did not trust the sheriff to care about a nobody like her. She kept her head down and her eyes open, and tried to ignore the cold knot of fear in her stomach. Friday afternoon, as she walked back from the Chen cabin, Donovan stepped out from behind a building directly into her path. Penelope stopped, her heart leaping into her throat. "Miss Bradford," he said, his voice oily, "we have unfinished business." "I have no business with you, excuse me." She tried to step around him. He moved to block her. "You cost me some pride the other day getting your mountain man to chase us off. I do not like that. That was not my fault." "Sure it was. You could have been friendly, but instead you had to act all high and mighty." He stepped closer, and Penelope smelled whiskey on his breath. "I think you owe me an apology." "I do not owe you anything. Get out of my way." His hand shot out and grabbed her wrist, squeezing hard. Penelope gasped at the pain. "I think you do. I think you owe me." He did not finish the sentence because Marcus appeared behind him like an avenging angel, grabbed him by the collar and the seat of his pants, and physically lifted him off the ground. Donovan yelped as Marcus carried him 3 steps to the water trough and dropped him into it with a tremendous splash. "I warned you to leave her alone," Marcus said, his voice deadly calm. "Next time I will not be so gentle." Donovan sputtered and thrashed in the trough, his scarred face purple with rage. "You son of a—" "Careful." Marcus' hand moved to the knife at his belt. "Think real hard before you finish that sentence." Other people had gathered now, drawn by the commotion. Donovan looked around at the watching faces, then back at Marcus, and whatever he saw there made him reconsider. He climbed out of the trough, dripping and furious, and stalked away without another word. Marcus turned to Penelope, and his expression shifted from dangerous to concerned in a heartbeat. "Did he hurt you?" She looked down at her wrist, where red marks showed where Donovan had grabbed her. "I am fine. Let me see." He reached for her hand, then stopped, waiting for permission. Penelope, not quite sure why, extended her arm. Marcus cradled her hand gently in his massive ones, examining the bruises with a frown. "This will be sore tomorrow. You should put something cold on it." "How did you know I needed help?" "I did not. I was coming to find you because I wanted to ask if you would have dinner with me tomorrow night. I saw him grab you and just reacted." He released her hand carefully. I am sorry if I overstepped. You saved me. Again." Penelope shook her head, trying to process what had just happened. "I do not understand why you keep doing that." "Because it is the right thing to do. Because you deserve to be safe." He paused. "And because I care what happens to you." The simple honesty of it cut through all her defenses. Penelope felt tears prick her eyes and blinked them back furiously. "I do not know how to respond to that." "You do not have to respond. Just think about dinner tomorrow. There is a decent restaurant at the hotel. Nothing fancy, but the food is good." She should refuse. Every lesson her life had taught her said this was a mistake, that letting this man get close would only lead to pain. But standing there in the dusty street with her wrist throbbing and her heart racing, Penelope found she was tired of being afraid, tired of being alone, tired of letting past hurts dictate her future. "All right," she said. "Dinner tomorrow." His smile was like sunrise over the mountains. 6 o'clock. I will meet you at the hotel." That night, Penelope tried on both her dresses twice, hating them equally for their shabbiness and worn patches. She had no jewelry, no way to make herself pretty. Finally, she settled on the blue calico because it was slightly less faded, and she borrowed an iron from Mrs. Henderson to press it carefully. "Going somewhere special?" the landlady asked. "Dinner with Marcus McAllister." Mrs. Henderson's eyebrows rose. "The mountain man? Well, he is a good one, that Marcus. Quiet, keeps to himself, but honest as the day is long. My Henry bought a mule from him last year, and Marcus threw in a saddle because he said he had no use for it. Most men would have charged extra. You know him." "Everyone knows everyone here, dear. Marcus has been coming through Mineral Park for 3, maybe 4 years now. Never causes trouble, always pays his bills, helps folks when they need it. If you are worried about his character, do not be." But Penelope was worried, though not about Marcus' character. She was worried about her own scarred, suspicious heart and whether it remembered how to feel anything beyond fear. Saturday evening arrived too quickly. Penelope walked to the hotel at precisely 6 o'clock, her hands clammy despite the dry heat. Marcus was already there, waiting on the porch, and she almost did not recognize him at first. He had trimmed his beard, tied his long hair back neatly, and wore clean clothes that looked new. He stood when he saw her, and she noticed he was nervous too, his big hands fidgeting with his hat brim. "Miss Bradford, you look lovely." The compliment flustered her. "Thank you. You look very nice as well." They went inside to the restaurant, a modest room with a dozen tables covered in checkered cloths. Marcus held her chair for her, his manners surprisingly refined for someone who lived alone in the mountains. When they were seated, he seemed at a loss for words, studying the menu with intense concentration. "I have not done this in a long time," he admitted finally. "Done what?" "Had dinner with a woman I wanted to impress." His honesty disarmed her yet again. "You do not need to impress me." "I think I do. You are the first person in a very long time who has made me want to try." He set down the menu and looked at her directly. "Penelope, may I call you that?" The use of her first name sent an unexpected warmth through her. "Yes, Penelope, I know you have been hurt. I do not know the details, but I can see it in the way you hold yourself, the way you flinch from kindness. I want you to know that I understand, and I am not asking you to trust me right away. I know that trust has to be earned, but I would like the chance to earn it." She folded her hands in her lap, the bruises on her wrist hidden by her sleeve. "What if I cannot? What if I am too broken to trust anyone?" "You are not broken. Battered, maybe. Cautious, definitely, but not broken." He reached across the table, stopping just short of touching her hand. "And even if you were, broken things can be mended. I have seen it happen." The waitress arrived then, and they ordered food. As the evening progressed, Penelope found herself relaxing degree by degree. Marcus asked about her childhood, and she told him about the good parts, the times before her father's drinking got bad, when her mother would sing while she sewed and they would walk to the park on Sundays. He told her about growing up in the wilderness, learning to read tracks to predict weather to survive in conditions that would kill the unprepared. "You ever get lonely?" Penelope asked. "Living so far from other people, sometimes," Marcus admitted. "But I have always been more comfortable with silence than with crowds. Too many people, too much noise, it makes me feel trapped." "I understand that. When I first got to Mineral Park, I thought the emptiness would drive me mad, but now I find the quiet almost peaceful. It is the people who make me nervous. Not all people, I hope." She met his eyes, those storm-gray depths that seemed to see straight through her defenses. "Not all," she said softly. After dinner, Marcus walked her back to the boarding house. The night air was cooling finally, and stars blazed overhead in impossible profusion. They walked slowly, neither wanting the evening to end. "I go back to my claim tomorrow," Marcus said as they approached Mrs. Henderson's porch. "But I will be back in town in 2 weeks for supplies." "May I see you again then?" 2 weeks felt like an eternity and an eye blink at once. Penelope nodded. "I would like that." "Good." He smiled, then seemed to struggle with something internal. "Penelope, I want to kiss you goodnight, but I will not unless you want me to." Her heart stuttered. She had been kissed before by a boy in St. Louis who had promised to marry her and then vanished when she refused to give him more than kisses. It had left her feeling used, foolish. This felt different. Marcus was asking, not taking, giving her the choice. "Yes," she whispered. "You may." He cupped her face in his large, calloused hands with exquisite gentleness and bent to brush his lips against hers. The kiss was soft, sweet, asking nothing but offering everything. When he pulled back, Penelope felt tears on her cheeks and was not sure when they had started falling. "Did I hurt you?" Marcus asked, alarmed. "No, no, you did not hurt me at all." She wiped her eyes, laughing a little at herself. "I just forgot that kindness existed, I think. You reminded me." He kissed her forehead then, tender and protective. "Sleep well, Penelope, I will think of you." She watched him walk away into the darkness, his tall form gradually disappearing. Then she went inside, climbed the stairs to her small room, and lay awake for hours, replaying every moment of the evening. The next 2 weeks crawled by with agonizing slowness. Penelope worked her various jobs, saved what money she could, and found her thoughts constantly drifting to Marcus. She tried to rein them in, to maintain her carefully constructed emotional distance, but it was like trying to hold back a flood with her bare hands. "Mrs. Chen noticed the change in her. "You are smiling more is good. You are too young to be so serious all the time." "I am not that young. 22 is practically an old maid." The old woman snorted. "When you are my age, you will look back on 22 and laugh. You have plenty of time." But Penelope was not sure she wanted time. For the first time since coming to Mineral Park, she wanted something specific, something she could almost name. She wanted to see Marcus again, wanted to hear his deep voice, feel the safety of his presence. Wanted to believe that maybe, just maybe, not everyone who claimed to care would ultimately betray her. Thomas Gentry made one more attempt to court her, appearing at the boarding house with flowers and renewed assurances of his good prospects. Penelope turned him down more firmly this time, and he left with a warning that she would regret her stubbornness when winter came and work dried up. His words worried her, but not enough to make her reconsider. Finally, blessedly, the 2 weeks ended. Penelope woke on the expected day with butterflies in her stomach. She wore her best dress again, spent extra time on her hair, and tried not to watch the street from the boarding house window like a lovesick girl. Marcus arrived just after noon, his pack mule laden with supplies to trade. He spotted her on the porch and his whole face lit up. Before Penelope quite knew what she was doing, she was hurrying down the steps toward him. "You are here," she said, then felt foolish for stating the obvious. "I am here." He dismounted, handed his horse's reins to the stable boy with a coin, and stood before her looking uncertain. "I missed you." The confession should have frightened her. Instead, it felt like a gift. "I missed you too." They walked to the restaurant again, and this time the conversation flowed more easily. Marcus told her about his 2 weeks at the claim, the silver ore he had extracted, a family of foxes that had taken up residence near his cabin. Penelope told him about Mrs. Chen's grandson visiting and teaching her some words in Cantonese, about the new cook at the restaurant who made the best biscuits she had ever tasted. Over the following months, a pattern developed. Marcus came to town every 2 or 3 weeks, and they spent as much time together as Penelope's work schedule allowed. They took walks into the foothills, where he taught her to identify edible plants and showed her the tracks of various animals. They had quiet dinners and long conversations. They sat on the boarding house porch in the cooling evenings and watched the stars emerge. Slowly, cautiously, Penelope felt the walls around her heart beginning to crack. Marcus never pushed, never demanded more than she was willing to give. He seemed content to simply be near her, to talk and listen and learn who she was beneath the armor of self-protection. One evening in late September, as they sat watching the sunset paint the mountains purple and gold, Marcus said, "Tell me about what hurt you, about who taught you not to trust." Penelope's first instinct was to deflect, to change the subject, but she was tired of carrying the weight of it alone. "My father," she said finally. "He was not always bad. When I was very small, he was kind, funny even. But something happened, I never knew what, and he started drinking. The more he drank, the meaner he got. My mother bore the worst of it. He would hit her, call her terrible names, spend all his money on whiskey while we went hungry." Marcus sat very still beside her, listening. "I tried to protect her," Penelope continued. "Got between them sometimes. That only made him angrier. When I was 16, he broke her arm in 3 places. She told the doctor she fell down the stairs. Everyone knew it was a lie, but no one did anything. She told me that was how the world worked, that trusting anyone, even family, especially family, would only bring pain. That I should never depend on anyone but myself. What happened to them? She died of pneumonia when I was 20. The doctor said she probably could have survived if she had been stronger, better fed. But she was not. My father did not even come to the funeral. I left St. Louis as soon as I could scrape together money. My uncle's letter seemed like a miracle, a chance to start over. And instead, you found more disappointment. Yes, I thought maybe my mother was right. That trust is foolish, that everyone will let you down eventually." Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "My father taught me that too, in his way. When he gave up and abandoned me, he was showing me that I could not count on anyone, that people would fail you when you needed them most. How did you move past it? I am not sure I have, completely. But I learned that there is a difference between blind trust and earned trust. Your father did not deserve your mother's trust. He proved that over and over. But that does not mean no one deserves it. It means you have to be careful, yes. Protect yourself, yes. But also stay open to the possibility that someone might surprise you. Is that what you are trying to do? Surprise me." He turned to look at her, his expression serious. "I am trying to show you that trust does not have to bring pain, that it can bring joy instead, peace, partnership. I am trying to be the kind of man worthy of your trust, Penelope, even if it takes a lifetime." Her breath caught. "Marcus, I love you," he said simply. "I have loved you since that first day when you pulled away from me like I might hurt you, and I saw all that strength and fear mixed together. I love your courage and your caution. I love how you hold your head high even when the world has knocked you down. I love the way you laugh at my terrible jokes and the way you listen when I talk about ore deposits like they are the most fascinating thing in the world. I love you, and I am not asking you to say it back. I just need you to know. Penelope felt tears streaming down her face. I am scared. I know. What if you change? What if you become someone different, someone cruel, then you leave? I would never stop you, never hold you against your will. But Penelope, I swear to you on everything I hold sacred, I will never raise my hand to you in anger. I will never speak to you with cruelty. I will never make you small so I can feel big. That is not who I am, and it is not who I will ever be. She searched his face, looking for deception, for the crack in the facade, but there was only honesty, raw and complete. This man, this massive mountain of strength, was offering her his heart with no guarantees, no demands, just patient, steadfast love. I think I love you too, she whispered. I am terrified of it, but I think I do. Marcus smiled, and it was like the sun breaking through storm clouds. Then that is enough. We will figure out the rest together. He kissed her then, deeper than before, and Penelope kissed him back, pouring all her fear and hope and tentative joy into it. When they finally broke apart, she rested her forehead against his chest and felt his arms come around her, strong and sure and safe. Will you marry me? Marcus asked into her hair. Not right now if you are not ready, but someday when you are sure. Will you be my wife? The old Penelope, the one who had arrived in Mineral Park bitter and closed off, would have said no immediately, would have fled from the very idea. But she was not that Penelope anymore. Marcus had shown her, day by day, week by week, that trust did not have to mean pain, that love could be gentle, that strength could be protective rather than threatening. Yes, she said. Someday, when I am ready, I will marry you. I will wait as long as you need. They sat together as darkness fell completely and the night sounds of the desert rose around them. Penelope felt something unfamiliar settle in her chest, and it took her a moment to identify it. Peace. The waiting was not as long as either of them expected. By November, when the desert nights turned cold and the first hints of winter touched the high mountains, Penelope knew she was ready. Marcus had continued his pattern of regular visits, and during each one he proved himself again. Patient, kind, honest to a fault. He had met her fear with understanding, her doubts with reassurance, her slow opening with respect. One afternoon he took her to see his claim. It was a day's ride into the mountains, and Penelope had never been on a horse for that long. Marcus rode his big bay, and she sat on a gentler mare he had borrowed from the livery, and they climbed into country that took her breath away. His cabin sat in a small valley surrounded by pine trees, with a stream running clear and cold nearby. It was larger than she had expected, built solidly from hewn logs, with a stone chimney and real glass windows. Inside, everything was neat and organized. A large bed covered in furs in one corner. A table and chairs he had built himself. Shelves lined with books which surprised her. You read, she said, running her fingers along the spines. Adventure novels, books about mineralogy, collections of poetry. My mother taught me. She said a man who could not read was only half a man. He moved to stand beside her. I know it is not much compared to a house in town. It is beautiful. And it was. It was clean and well made, and it felt like a home, not just a shelter. She could imagine herself here, waking to the sound of the stream, cooking at the big iron stove, sitting by the fire in winter while snow fell outside. Marcus, I am ready. Ready for what? To marry you, to be your wife, to trust that this is real. He pulled her into his arms, and she went willingly, no longer flinching from his strength. Are you sure? I am sure. I love you. I want to build a life with you. They were married 2 weeks later by the circuit preacher who passed through Mineral Park once a month. Penelope wore a new dress, cream-colored muslin that Mrs. Chen had helped her sew. Marcus wore his best clothes and looked almost uncomfortable in town surrounded by the small crowd that had gathered. Mrs. Henderson cried. Even the sheriff, who had seemed indifferent to Penelope before, wished them well. Thomas Gentry attended with a sour expression, leaving early. Donovan, thankfully, was nowhere to be seen. Rumor said he had moved on to one of the other mining camps after Marcus had made it clear he was not welcome in Mineral Park. After the brief ceremony, there was cake and lemonade at the boarding house. Then Marcus lifted Penelope onto his horse, swung up behind her, and they rode out of town toward the mountains as the sun began its descent. "Nervous?" he asked as they climbed the trail. "A little," Penelope admitted. She was pressed back against his broad chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart. "Are you terrified?" he said, and she felt him smile against her hair. "I have never been anyone's husband before. What if I am terrible at it? Then we will learn together." They reached the cabin as full darkness fell. Marcus lit lamps and built up the fire while Penelope stood in the center of the room, suddenly uncertain. This was her home now. This man was her husband. It was real and permanent and wonderful and frightening all at once. Marcus seemed to sense her nerves. He came to her slowly, giving her time to move away if she wanted. When she did not, he cupped her face gently. "We do not have to do anything you are not ready for. I meant what I said. I will wait for you." "I do not want to wait," Penelope said. "I am just afraid I will disappoint you." "That is impossible. You do not know that." "Yes, I do. Penelope, you are my wife, the woman I love. Nothing that happens between us could disappoint me because it is us together. There is no wrong way to do this." His patience, his gentleness, broke the last of her fear. Penelope reached up and pulled his head down to hers, kissing him with all the love and trust she had been hoarding. Marcus responded immediately, his arms coming around her, and for the first time in her life, Penelope felt completely safe in someone's embrace. What followed was tender and slow, Marcus taking infinite care with her, murmuring reassurances and endearments. When Penelope cried afterward, he held her close and stroked her hair until she could explain that these were good tears, healing tears, tears for the girl she had been who never believed this kind of love was possible. "You showed me," she whispered against his chest. "You showed me that trust can bring joy, that it can bring peace. You gave me back something I thought I had lost forever." "You did the same for me," Marcus said. "I was alone for so long, I forgot what it felt like to have someone to come home to. Someone who saw me, not just the size or the strength, but the man underneath. You gave me that gift, Penelope. You gave me a reason to build a life instead of just survive." They fell asleep tangled together in the big bed, and when Penelope woke in the night to find herself wrapped in her husband's arms, she did not pull away. She settled closer instead, breathing in the scent of pine and wood smoke, and the man who had taught her that not all trust led to pain. Winter came to the mountains with a vengeance. Snow piled high around the cabin, and some days they could not open the door for the drifts, but Marcus had prepared well. They had food stored, wood stacked, and each other for warmth. Penelope learned to cook on the big iron stove, to mend his work clothes, to help with the endless small tasks that kept the cabin running smoothly. Marcus taught her to snowshoe, and on clear days, they would trek through the winter wonderland, seeing deer and elk, following rabbit tracks, marveling at the silence of the snow-muffled world. He was endlessly patient with her learning, never mocking when she fell or got frustrated. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire and read aloud to each other, or Marcus would work on tanning hides while Penelope sewed, or they would simply talk. She learned about his dreams beyond the claim, how he wanted to build a proper house someday, maybe raise horses. He learned about her fears that still sometimes surfaced, the nightmares where she was back in St. Louis with her father's fists falling. "I am here," he would whisper on those nights, holding her until the shaking stopped. "You are safe. I will never let anyone hurt you again." And slowly, the nightmares came less frequently. Spring arrived in an explosion of wildflowers and rushing meltwater. Marcus returned to working his claim, and Penelope discovered she enjoyed the solitude of the cabin during the day, the chance to make it truly their home. She planted a garden, started collecting recipes from a cookbook Marcus bought her on a trip to town. She even tried her hand at preserving, with mixed results that made Marcus laugh and assure her they would not starve. In May, Penelope realized she had missed her monthly courses twice. She said nothing at first, afraid to hope, but when the pattern continued into June, she could not keep the secret any longer. "Marcus," she said one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, "I think I am going to have a baby." He went very still. Then he turned to her with wonder written across his rugged face. "Truly, I think so. I am not certain, but all the signs." He pulled her into his lap, cradling her like she was made of glass. "A baby, our baby." His voice was thick with emotion. "Penelope, you have given me everything I never knew I wanted. Are you happy?" Happy does not begin to cover it. He pressed his hand gently to her still flat stomach. "Does this scare you?" "A little," she admitted. "My mother died in childbirth with a baby that did not survive." "What if we will go to town when your time comes? We will have the doctor there. I will not let anything happen to you or our child. I swear it." His certainty soothed some of her fear, though not all of it. But over the following months, as her body changed and grew, Marcus proved his devotion in 1,000 small ways. He insisted she rest more. He took over the heavier chores without being asked. He made sure she ate well, bringing her wild strawberries and fresh trout, making sure she had milk and eggs when he went to town for supplies. In September, they moved to Mineral Park to be close to the doctor. Marcus rented rooms at the boarding house, much to Mrs. Henderson's delight, and found work helping at the livery to keep them occupied. Penelope felt enormous and ungainly, but Marcus looked at her like she was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. "You are carrying our child," he said when she complained about her swollen ankles and aching back. "How could you be anything but beautiful?" The pain started on a cold October night. Marcus fetched the doctor immediately, then paced the hallway outside their rooms like a caged bear while Penelope labored. Mrs. Henderson stayed with her, offering encouragement and cool cloths, but it was Marcus's voice Penelope called for when the pain became unbearable. He came in despite the doctor's protests, took her hand, and did not flinch when she squeezed hard enough to hurt. "You can do this," he told her. "You are the strongest person I know." 12 hours later, as dawn broke over the mountains, Penelope gave birth to a son. He came into the world squalling and healthy, with a shock of dark hair and his father's gray eyes. Marcus held him with shaking hands, tears streaming down his face, and Penelope felt her heart expand to hold all this new love. "What should we name him?" Marcus asked. They had discussed names, but suddenly none of them seemed right. Penelope looked at her husband, this mountain of a man reduced to tears by the tiny infant in his arms, and knew. "Matthew, after your father, before he lost himself. A reminder that people can change, that pain does not have to define us." "Matthew McAllister," Marcus said, testing it out. "It is perfect. He is perfect. You are perfect." He leaned down to kiss her forehead. "Thank you for trusting me enough to build this life together." "Thank you for teaching me how to trust," Penelope whispered back. They returned to the cabin when Matthew was a month old, and life settled into a new rhythm. Penelope had never known exhaustion like caring for an infant, but she had never known joy like it either. Watching Marcus with their son, seeing those huge, capable hands cradle the baby with infinite gentleness, filled her with gratitude that she had been brave enough to let love in. The years flowed past like the stream beside their cabin. Matthew grew into a sturdy, curious boy who followed his father everywhere. Marcus expanded the cabin, adding rooms, built a proper barn for the horses he had started raising. The mine claim provided steady income, enough that they were comfortable if not wealthy. When Matthew was 3, Penelope gave birth to a daughter they named Pearl, for the precious gift she was. Pearl had her mother's dark hair and her father's stubborn determination, and she wrapped Marcus around her tiny finger from day one. Penelope sometimes thought about the frightened, bitter woman who had stepped off the stagecoach in Mineral Park all those years ago. That woman seemed like a stranger now. She had learned to laugh again, to hope, to believe in tomorrow. She had learned that trust, given to the right person, did not bring pain at all. Instead, it brought everything worth having. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Marcus took Penelope back to the spot where they had first really talked, the overlook above Mineral Park. The town had grown some, but the mountains were eternal, and the view still took her breath away. "You remember what I told you here?" Marcus asked, his arm around her waist. "You told me about your father, about strength and survival. I told you I admired your strength, that I wanted to know you better." He turned to face her, and even after a decade together, the love in his eyes still made her heart skip. "I had no idea then how much you would change my life, how you would take a lonely mountain man and turn him into a husband, a father, a partner in everything. You taught me that trust goes both ways, that I could trust you with my heart, my fears, my dreams, and you would treasure them." "You did the same for me," Penelope said. "You showed me that not all men are cruel, that strength can be gentle, that love does not have to hurt. You gave me a family, Marcus. You gave me a home. You gave me myself back." They stood together as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. Below them, smoke rose from the cabin chimney where their children played under Mrs. Chen's watchful eye. She still kept chickens, though she was slower now, and Penelope helped her more than the other way around. The town continued its cycles, people coming and going, but the McAllisters remained, solid as the mountains themselves. "You ever regret it?" Marcus asked quietly. "Choosing this life?" "Choosing me." Penelope thought about her answer, wanting to give him the truth he deserved. "There are hard days," she said finally. "Days when the isolation feels heavy, or I miss having other women to talk to, or I worry about the children. But regret? Never." "You are the best decision I ever made, Marcus McAllister. Trusting you, loving you, building this life with you, those are the things I am most proud of. You taught me that trust can bring joy and peace. You proved it every single day." He kissed her then, soft and sweet, a kiss that held a decade of shared mornings and whispered conversations and quiet triumphs over fear. When they broke apart, Penelope saw tears on his weathered cheeks. "I love you," he said simply. "I will love you until the mountains crumble and the stars go dark. You are my heart, Penelope, my home, my everything. And you are mine." They walked back down to the cabin hand in hand as the first stars appeared overhead. The future stretched before them, unknown and unpredictable, but Penelope faced it without fear. Whatever came, they would face it together. That was what trust meant, not blindness to risk, but faith in the partnership. Not ignoring the possibility of pain, but believing in the greater possibility of joy. Her mother had been wrong, Penelope thought as she watched Marcus swing Matthew up onto his broad shoulders while Pearl tugged at his pant leg, demanding her turn. Trust did not have to bring pain. Given to the right person, cherished and nurtured and returned in full measure, trust could bring everything beautiful in life. It had certainly brought her everything she had ever wanted, and more than she had ever dared to dream. As Matthew grew older, he showed an aptitude for working with animals that delighted Marcus. The horse breeding operation expanded, and father and son would spend hours together training the young stock, their heads bent together in concentration. Pearl, meanwhile, developed her mother's quick mind and love of learning. Penelope taught her to read and write, and they would spend rainy afternoons with books spread around them, exploring worlds beyond their mountain valley. When Matthew was 10 and Pearl 7, Penelope found herself expecting again. This pregnancy was harder than the previous two, and she was often tired and ill. Marcus fretted over her constantly, much to her amusement and occasional exasperation. "I am fine," she insisted for the 100th time as he tried to make her sit down while she was kneading bread. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time." "Not my woman," Marcus said stubbornly. "My woman gets to rest and be taken care of." "Your woman will go mad if she has to spend another day sitting still." They compromised, as they always did. Penelope continued her normal activities, but promised to rest when she felt tired. Marcus hovered but tried to be less obvious about it. The children, sensing something important was happening, were on their best behavior. In March of 1889, 11 years after that first dinner in Mineral Park, Penelope gave birth to twin boys. The labor was difficult, longer than the previous ones, and there was a moment when the doctor looked worried that sent Marcus into a barely controlled panic. But Penelope, drawing on reserves of strength she had not known she possessed, pushed through the pain and exhaustion to bring both babies safely into the world. They named them James and Joseph, and they were identical from the start, with Marcus's gray eyes and Penelope's dark hair. Marcus held one in each arm and looked at his wife with such profound love and gratitude that it made her cry. "4 children," he said wonderingly. "How did I get so lucky?" "We are both lucky," Penelope corrected. "Look at what we built, Marcus. Look at this family." Matthew and Pearl were fascinated by their tiny brothers, wanting to help with everything. The cabin, even with Marcus's expansions, felt suddenly crowded. So Marcus began work on a proper house, a real structure with multiple bedrooms, a large kitchen, and a parlor for receiving the occasional visitors who made the trek up the mountain. The building took 2 years, with Marcus doing most of the work himself, and Matthew helping as much as a boy of 12 could manage. When it was finished, it was beautiful, solid log construction with a wide porch and shutters. Penelope had painted a cheerful blue. They moved in on a bright summer day, and Penelope stood in her new kitchen and felt tears of joy streaming down her face. "Why are you crying, Mama?" Pearl asked, concerned. "Because I am happy, sweetheart. Because this is home, and we are all together, and I never dreamed I could have something so wonderful." That evening, with the children finally asleep in their new rooms, Marcus and Penelope sat on their new porch and watched the stars emerge. "Do you remember that first night I kissed you?" Marcus asked. "Outside Mrs. Henderson's boarding house." "Of course I remember. I cried all over you. You said I had reminded you that kindness existed, that you had forgotten." He took her hand, lacing their fingers together. "I think about that sometimes. About how close I came to never meeting you. If I had come to town a different week, if you had taken a different route, if 1,000 tiny things had been different, we might never have found each other. But we did find each other, and you changed everything, Marcus. You took a woman who thought she would always be alone and showed her what love could be. Real love, the kind that builds and protects and cherishes. You gave me a life I never believed was possible. You gave me the same, Penelope. Before you, I was just existing, surviving. You taught me how to truly live, how to hope, how to be vulnerable enough to love someone completely. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the night sounds of the forest. Then Penelope said, "I want to write to Mrs. Henderson. Tell her about the new house, the twins. She was so kind to me when I had nothing. She will be glad to hear from you. We should invite her to visit when the weather is good. And Mrs. Chen, she is getting so old now, I worry about her. We will bring her here if she needs it. She can have one of the spare rooms, help with the garden if she wants. You know I would never turn away anyone who was good to you." This was Marcus, Penelope thought. Always thinking of others, always willing to help. The man who had thrown Donovan in a water trough for grabbing her wrist. The man who had waited patiently for her to learn to trust. The man who held their babies with infinite gentleness and taught their son to be honorable and strong. He was everything good she had never believed existed in men. The years continued their steady march. Matthew grew into a young man who looked remarkably like his father, tall and broad and strong. He fell in love with the daughter of a rancher from the next valley over, and Marcus and Penelope attended the wedding with pride and joy. Pearl proved to be brilliant, with a hunger for education that outstripped what Penelope could teach her. When she was 16, they made the difficult decision to send her to a school in Prescott, where she could prepare for college. "She will come back," Marcus assured Penelope as they watched their daughter ride away in the stagecoach. "And even if she does not, even if she finds her place somewhere else, we raised her to be strong and smart and brave. That is all we can do." The twins, now 10 years old, were already showing signs of being as different in temperament as they were identical in appearance. James was quiet and thoughtful, happiest when reading or drawing. Joseph was all energy and mischief, constantly in motion, constantly getting into trouble. Together, they kept the household lively. Penelope was 40 now, with silver threading through her dark hair and lines at the corners of her eyes from years of smiling. Marcus was 43, his long hair more gray than brown now, his face weathered by sun and wind. But when he looked at her, she still saw the same love that had been there from the beginning. "I have been thinking," Marcus said one evening as they prepared for bed, "about what happens when we are too old to manage this place on our own. We have years yet before we need to worry about that." "Maybe. But I like to plan ahead. Matthew has his own place now with his wife. Pearl might come back after her schooling, or she might not. The twins will grow up and have their own lives. I do not want you to be stuck taking care of an old mountain man in the middle of nowhere." Penelope turned to face him, taking his weathered face in her hands. "Marcus McAllister, I chose this life. I chose you. Wherever you are, that is where I want to be. If we are old and creaky on this mountain, so be it. If we end up back in town, that is fine too. As long as we are together, I do not care. You still trust me then, after all these years, more than ever. You have earned that trust 1,000 times over. You showed me that my mother was wrong, Marcus. Trust does not have to bring pain. With the right person, it brings everything good. Joy and peace and love and family and a home. All of it. You gave me all of it." He kissed her then, deep and thorough, and she responded with all the passion of a woman who had learned that physical love could be tender and beautiful. When they finally broke apart, Marcus rested his forehead against hers. "I love you, Penelope McAllister. I will love you until I take my last breath, and if there is anything beyond that, I will love you there too. And I love you, always." Pearl did come home after her schooling, bringing with her a young man she had met in Prescott. He was a teacher, earnest and kind, and Marcus approved after a long conversation that left the young man sweating but smiling. They were married in the spring of 1895, in the parlor of the big house, surrounded by family and friends who had made the journey up the mountain. Matthew's wife gave birth to Penelope and Marcus's first grandchild, a girl they named Eleanor. Penelope held the baby and marveled at the continuation of the family they had built, this legacy of love that started with two damaged people choosing to trust each other. The twins grew into young men, as different as ever but devoted to each other. James took after his mother's contemplative nature and announced his intention to study medicine. Joseph followed his father's path, learning everything he could about horses and mining and surviving in the wilderness. In 1900, as a new century dawned, Marcus and Penelope sat on their porch and took stock of their lives. They were in their 50s now, still strong but feeling the years. The children were all grown, pursuing their own dreams. The ranch and mining operation were prosperous. They had 6 grandchildren with more likely on the way. When I rode into Mineral Park that first time and saw you standing in the street after that shooting, Marcus said, I never imagined this, all of this. A family, grandchildren, a legacy. When I arrived on the stagecoach from St. Louis, I thought my life was over, Penelope replied. I thought I would spend whatever years I had left alone, surviving but not really living. You changed everything, Marcus. You showed me what trust could build, what love could create. We built it together, you and I. Every choice, every challenge, every joy, we faced it all together. Penelope leaned her head on his broad shoulder, still finding comfort in his strength after all these years. Do you know what I am most grateful for? What? That I was brave enough that day to accept your dinner invitation. That despite all my fear, despite everything I had been taught about not trusting, I took that chance. Because if I had not, I would have missed all of this beautiful, messy, wonderful life. I am grateful you took that chance too. I am grateful for every day since. They sat in comfortable silence as the sun set over the mountains they had called home for over 20 years. The future was uncertain, as futures always were. But Penelope faced it without the fear that had once consumed her. She had learned that trust, genuine and hard-earned, was the foundation of everything good. And she had Marcus, her partner, her love, her home. Whatever came next, they would face it together. Just as they always had. Years rolled by with the steady certainty of seasons. Marcus and Penelope aged gracefully into their 60s, their children all settled in their own lives but never straying far. The ranch house was frequently filled with grandchildren, their laughter echoing through rooms that Penelope had once only dreamed of having. Matthew took over much of the day-to-day running of the ranch and mining operation, allowing Marcus to slow down without feeling useless. Pearl and her husband built a school in Mineral Park, which had grown into a proper town with a railroad connection. The twins, now in their 30s, had both married and were raising families of their own. On a crisp autumn day in 1910, Marcus and Penelope celebrated their 32nd wedding anniversary with a gathering of the entire family. The house overflowed with people, 3 generations of Mac Allisters, all descended from a lonely mountain man and a frightened woman who had dared to trust each other. As Penelope watched her grandchildren play in the yard while her children and their spouses talked and laughed, she felt overwhelmed with gratitude. All of this, every bit of it, existed because she had been brave enough to believe that maybe, just maybe, not everyone would hurt her. Marcus found her standing at the window, tears streaming down her weathered face. "What is wrong, my love?" "Nothing is wrong. Everything is right. Look at what we did, Marcus. Look at what we built from nothing but faith in each other." He wrapped his arms around her from behind, and they stood together watching their legacy unfold before them. "Your mother told you trust only brought pain," Marcus said softly. "But she was wrong. Trust brought all of this. Joy, peace, love, family, everything worth having. You showed me that. You and your patience and your gentle strength. You never gave up on me, even when I was too scared to give up on myself. How could I give up on the woman I loved, on the strongest person I have ever known?" He turned her in his arms to face him. "Penelope McAllister, you are the best thing that ever happened to me. Marrying you was the smartest decision I ever made." "Marrying you saved my life," Penelope whispered. "Not just from poverty or loneliness, but from myself, from the bitterness and fear that would have consumed me. You showed me a different way to live, a better way." Their children called them to come join the party, to cut the cake Pearl had made. As they walked hand in hand to join their family, Penelope reflected on the strange and beautiful journey that had brought her here. From St. Louis to Mineral Park, from fear to love, from isolation to belonging. She had been warned that trust only brought pain. But a mountain man with storm cloud eyes and a gentle heart had shown her the truth. Trust, given to the right person and nurtured with care, could bring everything beautiful in the world. It could bring joy and peace and love that lasted a lifetime and beyond. As Marcus kissed her temple and their grandchildren clamored for attention, Penelope smiled. She had learned to trust, and in doing so had found her home. The years grew shorter as they grew older, but no less sweet. Marcus and Penelope settled into the comfortable rhythm of long married couples, anticipating each other's needs, finishing each other's sentences, finding contentment in simple companionship. They spent their days tending the garden, reading together on the porch, receiving visits from their ever-growing family. In the winter of 1915, Marcus fell ill with pneumonia. For the first time since Penelope had known him, he looked frail, his massive frame diminished by sickness. She nursed him with fierce determination, refusing to consider a world without him in it. "You are not leaving me," she told him as she spooned broth into his mouth. "We have too much left to do, too many grandchildren to meet, too many sunsets to watch together." "Bossy woman," Marcus said with a weak smile. "When did you get so bossy?" "I learned from the best. You have been bossing me around for 37 years, telling me to rest, to eat, to let you take care of things. Now it is my turn." He recovered, slowly but surely, and by spring he was back to his old self, if a bit more careful about overexertion. The scare reminded them both that their time was precious, that they needed to savor every moment. "I want to go back to Mineral Park," Penelope said one morning. "To where it all started. I want to see the boarding house, the restaurant where we had our first dinner." "Can we do that?" Marcus, who would have ridden through fire for her, immediately agreed. They made the journey down the mountain on a bright May morning, riding side by side as they had so many times before. Mineral Park had changed dramatically. The railroad had brought prosperity and growth. Buildings that had been rough lumber when Penelope arrived were now solid brick. The boarding house was still there, though Mrs. Henderson had passed away years ago. They found the restaurant, now expanded and renovated but still in the same location. The owner, recognizing Marcus, gave them the best table and refused to let them pay. As they ate, Penelope reached across the table to take Marcus's hand. "You remember what you said to me here. That first night, I said a lot of things. Probably talked too much, I was so nervous. You said you were not asking me to trust you right away, but that you wanted the chance to earn it. You said broken things could be mended." She squeezed his weathered hand. "You mended me, Marcus. You took all my broken pieces and put them back together with patience and love." You did the same for me. I was broken too, Penelope. Broken by loneliness and loss and the belief that I was better off alone. You showed me what partnership could be, what love could build. They finished their meal and walked through town hand in hand, two old people tracing the path of their younger selves. They stood outside the boarding house where Marcus had first kissed her, where she had cried because kindness had surprised her so completely. I was so afraid, Penelope said softly. So convinced that trusting you would end in pain, just like my mother warned. I almost let that fear win. But you did not. You were brave enough to take a chance on a rough mountain man who did not know the first thing about courting a lady. You knew enough. You knew how to be honest and patient and kind. That was all I needed. They rode back to the ranch as the sun began to set, painting the mountains in shades of gold and purple. When they arrived, they found the house full of family who had come to surprise them with an early anniversary celebration. Matthew had brought Alina, now a young woman engaged to be married. Pearl arrived with her 3 children. The twins appeared with their wives and a total of 7 children between them. As the evening unfolded with food and laughter and stories, Marcus pulled Penelope aside. "This," he said, gesturing to the crowded, happy house. "This is what trust built. Not just our trust in each other, but the trust we taught our children and they are teaching theirs. The knowledge that love does not have to hurt, that family can be a source of joy instead of pain. That is your legacy, Penelope. That is what you gave the world." "We gave it together," she corrected. "Everything we did together." As Penelope looked around at her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, she understood the full truth of what Marcus had shown her all those years ago. Trust did not have to bring pain. With the right person, with patience and honesty and unwavering commitment, trust could bring everything worth having. It had brought her joy beyond measure, peace that settled deep in her bones, a love that had sustained her through every challenge and celebrated every triumph. And a family, this beautiful, noisy, complicated family that existed because she had been brave enough to believe that maybe, just maybe, one mountain man meant what he said. Marcus McAllister had promised to earn her trust. He had spent a lifetime doing exactly that. And in trusting him, Penelope had found not just a husband or a home, but herself. The woman she was always meant to be, unbroken by fear, unlimited by past pain, free to love and be loved in return. As the party continued around them, Marcus and Penelope slipped out to the porch they had sat on countless times before. The stars were emerging overhead, brilliant and eternal. Marcus wrapped a blanket around Penelope's shoulders and pulled her close. "Happy?" he asked. "Happier than I ever dreamed possible," she answered. "You kept your promise, Marcus. You showed me that trust could bring joy and peace. You proved it every single day for almost 40 years. And I will keep proving it for as long as I have breath in my body. I love you, Penelope McAllister. My wife, my partner, my heart. Thank you for trusting me. Thank you for building this life with me. Thank you for being brave enough to let me love you. Thank you for being worthy of that trust. Thank you for never giving up on me. Thank you for showing me what love is supposed to be." She kissed him softly, a kiss that held decades of shared history and unshakable devotion. "I love you, Marcus. Today, tomorrow, and always." They sat together under the stars, surrounded by the laughter of their family, held safe in the love they had built together. Two people who had been broken by life and healed by each other. Two souls who had taken the risk of trust and been rewarded beyond measure. In the end, Penelope's mother had been wrong. Trust did not have to bring pain. With Marcus, it had brought everything beautiful in life. Everything worth fighting for. Everything worth believing in, it had brought her home.